Everything is very complex in an environment of monetary inflation. And I wrote at least 3 or 4 reports recently that indicate that we are at a major turning point in the asset inflation. I define asset inflation as opposed to consumer price inflation as an inflation that essentially the Federal Reserve does not pay attention to. In other words, when home prices go up, the Fed doesn't bother to do anything about it as long as the consumer price index doesn't go up a lot. And they don't care if the stock market goes up, but they care when it goes down. That is another story. So we had in the last, say, 30, 40 years, pronounced asset inflation. The result is that young people in the Western world, not just in America, in Germany, Switzerland, and so forth, they don't have enough money and they don't earn enough to buy homes. In other words, in economic terms, the affordability of buying homes at the present time, measured statistically compared to the income of people, is at the lowest level in history in the US. Lowest. Now the Fed, they know that, but they can't really deflate the housing market, because if everybody is used to asset inflation, if say the stock market drops 50%, the home market drops 50%, it causes huge economic damage. So they're kind of in a very difficult situation, which they self-inflicted. I have to say this, they made a mistake. They boosted asset prices and now they can't tighten monetary conditions sufficiently to bring down these asset prices without causing a significant damage. Now, recently we had this consumer price inflation, so the central banks increased interest rates. But believe me, if money was tight, and I have to stress here, the absolute level of interest rates does not tell you whether monetary policies are tight or not. You could have, like in Turkey, interest rates at 100%. They have now dropped to 60% or so. But you could have very high interest rates and still lose monetary policies. That happens in inflationary countries. And you could have tight monetary policy, like in Japan, if interest rates went to 3%. Let's look at the facts. The US has a federal debt of something like $35 trillion. The deficit annually is huge, say $2-3 trillion. And so the government debt keeps on going up. The interest rates on the government debt have gone up, and the interest payments have gone up dramatically. The US has 3 options at this stage, and I haven't even touched on the unfunded liabilities of the government and the corporate sector, because what you see as debt is as today, but not what the government owes in terms of the promises they have made to the veterans, to the firemen, the retirees, and corporate pension funds as well. So if we added all these unfunded liabilities, the debt would be huge. Anyway, the US can do 3 things, and other countries, Western democracies as well. They can cut spending of the government expenditures. That they can. But no politician will be elected if he goes and says, look, we must tighten our belts and we have to reduce spending. We cannot pay you your pensions. Go and try that with the military veterans, the policemen and the firemen. You have a revolution in America. So that option is possible, but is impossible to implement in a democracy. Now, the second option is to go to the people and say, okay, we have all these deficits, we have to cover them, we have to increase taxation. I'd like to see the politician who gets elected, who goes to the constituents and tells them, sorry boys, we have to increase taxation. Nobody will be elected. The third option, and that is the one that all governments throughout history have embarked upon, and that is inflation. Inflation caused by excessive government spending, and the excessive government spending is then reflected in a fiscal deficit, which necessitates the central bank to finance partially or entirely. So it's a combination of fiscal deficits and expansionary monetary policies. And that leads to inflation. And in my view, we have now a window of opportunity for maybe 6-9 months where bonds can rally, because, and this we have to touch upon in the context of commodities as well. At the present time, we are already in recession, in my view. Other people will disagree with that. In my view, looking at the reality, not statistics that are published by the government in nominal terms, but in real terms, demand is not there. So this is reflected in, a low lumber price, a relatively low copper price, and so forth and so on. The demand is simply not there. And so we could have a bond market rally for 3 or 6 months. But as soon as the inflation looks a little bit better statistically, the central banks will cut rates. That I have no doubt about it. No doubt. But, you have to study what happened in the 70s. Because in the 70s, the inflation already in 1969, 1970 was higher than it is now, but interest rates were much higher. And then they fell into 72, and then they rose again into 74, then they fell again, and so on. But basically, inflation accelerated throughout the 70s because interest rates in real terms were mostly negative. That is the crucial point. And the government will say, well, our bond yields are, say, 5% and inflation is now 3%, so the real yields are 2%. But what if the government inflation figures are wrong? I know private economists, they say the inflation is still running around 7% per annum. And these are not newcomers. These are people that have been publishing inflation figures for the last 30, 40 years. And they analyzed the statistics much more carefully than government officials. The government officials will never admit that they made a mistake. I've never seen that. Sometimes they apologize about some stupid remarks they make, but they apologize all the time and do not mean it. And never are they taken into or made responsible for something and penalized. But the inflation, the ordinary people, they can believe that, prices of bread going up and the prices of beef going up, it's because of Putin or some, they don't really blame the central bank. People don't understand central banking and the power that central banks have. I think that I'm one of the few people that has been recommending gold for the last 40 years in practically every newsletter. But I'm not saying this because I'm wanting to take credit for something that has worked out. Gold hasn't been the best investment, but it's a very obvious investment in an environment of money printing. Under normal circumstances, it's a very safe investment. But in a world that is controlled by evil people in government that locked people up, even in Western democracies, you never know, they could take the gold away. But in general, I think if someone has savings, then to hold some of it in gold instead of cash is a desirable measure to take. Say, I have been holding gold for a very long time and I keep on buying gold, sometimes more and sometimes less. I don't think that the gold price is all that cheap if I measure it compared to other commodities. But I could make the case that gold in 1970 was at $35 an ounce. Now it's at over $2,000. So it has kept up more or less with the rate of price increases. Now, if I would look at some of the inflation adjustments some private economists have made, then the price of gold is probably not all that high. If I look at the quantity of money in the world, 1970 and today, I look at the population 1970 and today, I look at the monetary reserves 1970 and today, and so on, I could make the case that gold is actually not very expensive. But I have to say, you see, I live in Thailand. At the present time, the economy here, I wouldn't call it a depression because it's not like the black and white pictures that you see from the US depression in the 1930s. And here, nobody's ever starving. This is a country that is rich in food. But the economy is not growing, so the business is bad. So what people do when the economy is bad, they have to sell things because most households, as you know, have been leveraged up by evil consumer lending companies. It's a big business. And the first thing they sell is obviously not the car nor the motorcycle because they need that to take the children to school and they need the car to go to work and so forth and so on. They don't sell the house because they need a house to live in. So what liquidity they have, they liquidate something that has gone up. So they sell gold. Everywhere in the world, poor people are selling the gold at the present time. They're not buying. I think we could see a monetary inflationary super cycle where the Fed and other central banks have no other option but to print money. Otherwise, the system collapses. And in a democracy, it's a president gets elected for 4 years. He doesn't want the collapse to occur under him. He doesn't mind it to occur under the next president and so forth. So they keep the system alive, and we could have monetary inflation that actually lifts assets that cannot be multiplied much to very high levels. That would include, say, collectibles, that would include paintings, that would include real estate. But real estate, as you know, commercial real estate is down 50-70% in American cities. And so we have to be careful because also collectibles, the tastes do change. Now every modern artist is desirable, but there are so many of them, most of them will fail. So, but the idea that we could have a cycle whereby assets you cannot multiply as fast as you can print money would go ballistic, that I would agree that is very likely. Because you understand, the moment the economy turns down, the moment asset markets turn down, Wall Street will tell the Fed, you better ease monetary conditions. You know, the paymaster on Wall Street that pay the fees of the central bankers, the speaking fees and the advisory fees, they will tell them what to do.